So here he kind of saves a little bit of face. Maybe wins that battle. I mean, as far as Marbury is concerned, he doesn't get his appointment. But he also, with his mind towards the war, he's also established that principle that we were talking about, the ability to interpret or determine an act of Congress, or the president for that matter, unconstitutional, which you guys pointed out in your presentation. To determine an act unconstitutional, we call that judicial review. Review. Judicial review. The ability to review the actions of Congress and then determine whether or not they fit within the Constitution. It's the power of evaluation. That former power of evaluation. This is a huge power. This is a
act of Congress and what else?
Acts of the President, act of Congress, to determine whether or not they fit within the Constitution. To make sure that they don't break the rules on how to govern. That they don't somehow upset the contract. With that decision, though it doesn't come into view, materialize right away, but with this precedent, this ability, this power of judicial review, the court really has put itself, not necessarily, even in my opinion, into a greater than equal party regarding the other two. The court gets to interpret what government can and cannot do. The court has even used judicial review in the Constitution to determine winners and losers. The court is, for all intents and purposes, legislated from the bench. Under the guise of this is the Constitution, this is what the Constitution stands for and means. And again, whether you're comfortable with that or not comfortable with that, that is an argument for a different time. But that is the outcome of Marbury versus Madison. And why it's so important, and why you'll find it in every textbook, every political science textbook, regarding the relationship between the federal government and states, regarding the relationship between the different parties of the federal government, the President and Congress. Now, this doesn't, again, materialize as this great weapon of the court and at this particular time under Marshall as the Federalists. And it's important to realize that judicial review is a tool. It's a tool. Somebody in your presentation, you pointed out the issue regarding guns and the packing and the whole 9 yards. A gun's a tool. A soup spoon's a tool. Both are dangerous depending on the intent behind them.
Pencils don't kill people. People kill.
Pencils don't kill people. People kill people. I like that. Spoons don't kill people. People kill people. Guns don't kill people. People kill people. Judicial review does not rewrite the Constitution. People rewrite the Constitution. Well, the idea is that utilizing that tool, depending on whose hands it's in, makes it either, again, dangerous or not dangerous, depending on your side of the ideological spectrum. Okay? Guy chasing you around, guy eating soup with a spoon, hey, no problem. Guy chasing you around with it, could have got your eye out, or a little bit disconcerting. Okay? Someone out squirrel hunting with a shotgun is one thing. Somebody chasing you around with that same shotgun's another, unless you're Dick Cheney. A little disconcerting, right? But the point I'm trying to make. Poor Dick Cheney. But the point I'm trying to make is that the tool of judicial review is ultimately how it's utilized. That's what makes it good or bad. And Marshall, the Federalist, doesn't come right out and say, all right, we're going to undo everything that Jefferson and the Anti-Federalists are doing, that we're going to say this is all unconstitutional. That little judicial review is tucked and held on to. And it comes out, again, something else you guys have talked about in your presentations, 1819 McCulloch versus Maryland. Probably the flip-flop of state power to federal government really takes place after the Civil War. There's no doubt about that. But leading up to that, in terms of interpretation of what the federal government can and cannot do, and leading up to the Civil War, adding fuel to it, in my opinion, is this case McCulloch versus Maryland. The case McCulloch versus Maryland is the state. It's really the state versus the federal government. The issue is banking and federal encroachment, if you will, into the arena of state banking, of private banks. and whether or not the federal government had the authority or the constitutional right to enter into the states and compete directly with the interests of the states and the state banks. And it's a good question. I mean, it's a very good question. The state at the time, Maryland, representing the states and their state interests. And I believe in the case of Maryland, their attempt to challenge the federal government was by taxing them. Basically, the mentality was, if you're going to be an entity in our state, we have the right to tax you. And McCulloch, in this case, McCulloch versus Maryland, McCulloch, representing the federal government, said we're not going to pay that tax. And initially, this case went to the state courts, and Maryland determined that Maryland was right, which was nice. And McCulloch said, well, hold on. Constitutionally, if there's an issue amongst between the federal government, between the states and the federal government, interpretation of the Constitution, the federal government ultimately has to decide this. And it went back to Marshall. And remember, Marshall's a Federalist, okay? So in that regard, utilizing the tool judicial review in the hands of a Federalist, he took a look at this relationship and he sided with the federal government. Now, you couldn't just side with the federal government by saying, well, the federal government has the power, that's all there is to it. There has to be a reason the federal government has the power. There has to be some place in there where that power is delegated to the federal government. And the big thing that comes out of McCulloch versus Maryland is this concept of implied power. Implied power is I don't want to say opposite of, but it is, to a degree, the counter, not necessarily opposite, but it counters or infringes upon the idea of enumerated power. Enumerated power are those things in a written document that are written, specifically identified, easily identifiable. The power to declare war. Enumerated power of the federal government. States can't declare war. That's the federal government does that. Standardization of weights and measures. Enumerated power in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8. It's there. You can read it. Power of the federal government. Power to coin money. Power of the federal government. Power to tax. Power of the federal government. All enumerated powers. Implied powers would be the powers that aren't written, that aren't specifically identified. Alluded to. Referred to, that there's a reference, or it's implied by. For example, the Constitution does not enumerate the federal government will have the authority and ability to build boats. The Constitution does say the federal government has the authority to maintain a navy. Well, it's hard to maintain a navy without boats. Right? I mean, what's the Navy without boats?
Happier sailors.
Probably the Army. I mean, isn't that? I know that my Navy men out there, certainly my Marines out there would disagree. I know. But a Navy without boats really is not a Navy. So it is certainly implied by the ability to maintain a Navy that you got to have some boats. In this case, regarding McCulloch versus Maryland, has the implication that if the federal government is going to regulate the value of its currency, it has to have control in the banking industry or some control in the banking industry, and that really becomes the heart of this discussion. 2:20, we'll leave it there. I will see you guys on Thursday. We'll pick it up. Continue on with federalism then. Team forward. Team forward.
I was sick on Thursday.
You were